When Indiana Jones returned in 2008 with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the reception was passionate, we'll say. But in a world with so many returning franchises, maybe it's held up okay. Let's jump in the fridge and find out. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Oh, do you? Do you have a bad feeling about this? Do you think it was neat that George Lucas referenced Star Wars with the script there?
You mean which time? I lost count.
Welcome everyone, this is a movie podcast. We are working through the Indiana Jones franchise because obviously Dial of Destiny is coming. In fact, when you get this review, it'll be next week. For us, it's like a month. But when you get this review, it'll be a week.
I think our review of it'll be next week, but I think it actually just came out like yesterday as of release dates.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, yes, our review of it will be next week. You know what I mean? But that's what matters here, is when it's coming to us for you. So, obviously, we'll see how that's going. I was going to say something. I'll save it for the end, right? Well, we can talk about expectations for the new one at the end, because it makes sense to put it at the end of the fourth one. But we'll get into it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out in 2008. We'll start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers. We've been up and down with this franchise. You know, we loved the first one. We weren't so hot on the second one. We quite like the third one. It has its problems, but definitely a solid sequel. Crystal Skull is the other one that is often greatly disliked on the internet, I think would be fair to say.
Isn't it that the even number Star Trek movies are good? Isn't that the thing?
Yes, although I don't necessarily agree with that, but that is the sentiment.
Fair enough. I'm wondering if indie is the flip, where it's the even number ones are like, oh, maybe you don't have to. You don't have to spend your time.
Basically, I like motion picture, and everyone can kiss my ass. Thank you.
Hey, man. If you got that kind of time to waste for a docking sequence, you take it.
I love a good docking sequence, me. Yeah. You dock that ship. You dock it.
I think that might trip up the YouTube algorithm. I think it's too close.
Anyway, so, Crystal Skull, I saw this in theaters. Obviously, it's the first Indiana Jones that I saw in theaters because, you know, Last Crusade literally came out the year I was born, so there wasn't much of an...
It just sounds like your parents weren't dedicated enough.
I would have been like, what? We looked this up last time, actually. I was like 2 months old.
You were like 3 months old, 2 months old, somewhere in there.
So, obviously, this was the first chance to go see one. 2008, I was 19, so that gives you a good idea of like how long it had been. In fact, literally 19 years, because I was born that year Last Crusade came out. Was excited to see it, hoped for the best, of course, and obviously the reaction to Crystal Skull is largely pretty negative, with a lot of key critiques that we'll get into if we agree with them, if our minds have changed over time. I think the most interesting lens to look at this one through now is that the nostalgia sequel is such a common, like, consistent thing now, that at this time, I think we had like Die Hard 4 the year before, and that was like, we're just starting to get into this idea of like resurrecting these old franchises that were maybe trilogies before, and we're going to milk them for some more now.
Yeah, it's basically hey, wait a minute, hold on. All the things that you went to go see as a kid, you now have disposable income. So we're just gonna put it all back into theaters, pay us more money.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. What's so funny about watching this now, though, is that Harrison Ford looks so old in the trailers for the new one. And he's obviously old in this one, but he looked young comparatively, because now I'm used to him now.
I mean, without getting too much into it, there was a part in here where Shia Labouf makes a joke saying, what are you, 80?
And he actually kind of is.
Like, he will be. We're going to see that.
Oh, dear. So... Yes, I mean, I don't really think there's much point of giving a plot synopsis, other than we have the addition of Mutt Williams, played by Shia LaBeouf. Marion's back. Our villain's played by Cate Blanchett. We'll talk about the characters in a bit. But I think before we get into any of those specifics, we'll just get the general feelings on the table, whip it out, get the doc on the display.
I thought we were recording that after this.
That's the Patreon, too hot for YouTube content. David, after watching it again now, and if you can remember how you felt the first time you saw it, if you do have those memories, general feelings on Crystal Skull.
This movie, when I remember seeing it, I remember it being really, really cheesy. I remember it being like, it didn't feel like there was this big threat. I wasn't super engaged with the adventure going on. I just remember everything feeling really cheesy. Going back and doing the first 3 Indiana Jones films right before this made me realize that since Temple of Doom, there always has been this level of cheesiness in Indiana Jones. So I get it. I see it now. But this particular one, the cheesiness was not the same. It was a different level. It was an entirely different feel to it. I'd say the worst thing I could say about this movie is that it feels so sanitized. Like, there is no dirt or grime in this movie. This movie was entirely filmed in a green screen set. And it's just, you feel that, you see that, you understand that there isn't anything like, there is no point where I feel like Harrison Ford actually got dirty making this movie. So in terms of how do I like it, compared to how I was, I guess would have been 10 years ago since I probably like really last sat down and watched it. I mean, it's not that much of a change. I think that it's pretty much the same as it was, but in terms of how I like it just in general, not good. Not a good movie. And I don't feel like I'm blowing anybody's hair back by saying that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I definitely get the critique that everything feels like it's on a soundstage surrounded by green screen, or there's like a chase in the jungle sort of like 2/3 in where obviously a lot of chase sequences like this are done with green screens, but long before this and long after this are green screened, and that's fine. But something about the weird kind of like they were trying to add this sort of blur whooshing effect to everything. It just made everything look very kind of phony in a way that I guess I expect it to have a certain level of fakeness because it is fake, but I guess what I'm saying is I just didn't like how this looked. I thought it looked bad as a visual, and therefore that I had more of a problem with it than maybe a normal just green screen effect. Right,
like we brought up before on how when they used green screen in like Raiders and Temple of Doom, it stood out. It wasn't good. It was not like it blended in seamlessly, but there was something to the fact that it didn't quite hit that uncanny valley, that it was so bad that it stood out. Whereas this one, it almost straddles that line of, well, it is really good, but it's not quite photo real. Yeah, and so you can tell this strangeness of, it feels like it's there, but at the same time, I know that it isn't in a deep guttural level.
But did you feel like though it was almost like they had Vaseline smeared across it to try and obscure the fact that it wasn't quite perfect? So I felt that kind of weird blurry dreamlike quality to a lot of the action sequences because they were trying to obscure it, and it just it felt off to me. But
I think the best sequence in this movie, which we'll get to, is the motorcycle chase around campus, because pretty much everything was shot on location. There were very few things that were green screened in.
It's stunt work, and all of the big indie stunts are all from behind, so a stuntman can do. I mean, it would be a stuntman anyway, but but especially in this case because he's an old man. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, my feelings watching it, I like parts of it well enough. Like, I think the opening like 20 minutes or whatever is mostly fine. Even enjoyable to a point. And then like the thing that everyone complains about and makes fun of in this movie hits, and I think because I hadn't seen this since the theater since 2008.
Okay.
And I always remembered the big thing, which we'll talk about in spoilers, but it involves a fridge, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. But the thing that really caught me off guard about watching it again now is just how needless the entire sequence is, because if you just cut to the next part without this little interlude, you wouldn't question anything. You're like, it's a threat they introduce just for the sake of having another little set piece moment that doesn't actually add anything to the plot. It's just really stupid. So
Yeah.
you know, there's stuff like that throughout it. There's beats that I don't like. I don't actually hate the concept of what the movie's about. I think they go too far with it. But
I think it's not focused at all. I mean, if you go down past the previous movies, it's like, all right, the specific thing we're looking for, the Ark, these stones, the Grail. This one, it's like, we got like 4 different myths going on, and we're just mishmashing them together. Who cares?
I think there's a good idea in there, and I do like the overall like subject that it ties into, because it's set in the 50s and it's a thing that feels appropriate to a movie that's going for a pulpy 50s feel.
Oh yeah,
and I think that works, but I do think they go far too, like the last like 10 minutes of the big stuff at the end just goes off a cliff in terms of pardon me, just goes off a cliff in terms of like I don't know. There's a certain point where you see a CG thing, and I'm just like, what are we doing? Why?
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, I don't think it's that, especially because it's in the opening sequence. A big thing of this is that it takes place at the beginning in Area 51. So you get a feel, if you know what Area 51's about, like where this is going. And I get it from a sense of this is set in 1957. If any serials were coming out at that point, they would be the sort of B-grade science fiction movies that were all the rage. And I understand the attempt of let's make this sort of fold into that time of the atomic age. But I think what people like most about indie is the mysticism. It is the back to the like 1930s and 40s era. And so pulling it ahead to this era and adapting with it, there's a reason people liked the throwback to begin with. They didn't care that it was specifically, I guess it would have been 50 years prior to whatever Harrison Ford's age is at that moment. Like it would have been...
Which is a little bit funny, actually, because he will almost... Like, the time period the new one has to be set in, because of when this is set and his age and all that, we're going to be in the 70s. We're almost at the point where Raiders of the Lost Ark is coming out, and timeline-wise, and that's quite funny to me.
I imagine some point in this movie, he's going to be running through some streets, and he's going to run into George Lucas shooting American Graffiti.
Oh, don't give them ideas. Oh, that'll make me cringe so much. Like, I actually, I don't mind doing the more sci-fi 50s pulp set. I'm actually on board with that idea. The idea that some cultures like were actually building stuff around, like, their mythology was built around the idea that at some point there was an alien or something. I think that's all very interesting. I think they just go far too nuts with it towards the end, because they want to do the big, it's 2008 now, we have to do big walls of CG destruction stuff happening, and we have to do big grandiose things, and I do think it takes away from stuff. There's the funny moment that Red Letter Media always makes fun of, which is the delivery of part-time when he's asked, because the take in the trailer's better, and it does stick out. Like, even watching it now, it just feels like, why is this the take that was used? There's so many little things, and this is directed by Spielberg. It's George Lucas's like co-story by, I think his credit is, and then David Cope, I think, is the screenplay writer. Like, I'm baffled by some of the choices that are made at points, but for the most part, I don't think it's that crazy or insane. I think it's just, it falls victim to what studios believed was popular in a blockbuster in 2008, and otherwise just feels like a very safe, and like you say, because of how they're shooting it, it just feels all very sanitized and soundstagey. And that scene where he says part-time is a good example of that, where I feel like I can almost sense the boundaries of the set and where the paintings are to make it look like we're outside, or the green screen or whatever,
And I wouldn't have a problem with that. Like, if they want to shoot it on green screen, that's fine. I don't have an inherent problem with that. But the way that they went about it, they didn't like work with that in mind, because every single one of the scenes, like you said, you could feel the boundaries.
Yeah.
If they had built the sets in a way and they had an idea for, like, as much as they aren't great, but like in the Star Wars prequels, they have those like short walking, talking scenes that just barely go down the length of a hallway, and that's because they're on a set. They can't walk any further. For this one, it would have been fine to have like those smaller, more intimate fight scenes on those smaller sets. But when you look at the images themselves of how the sets are built, it doesn't have this feel like it goes on forever, like the hallways in Star Wars does. It instead feels like here's the boundary and then the matte painting in the background.
This is blowing my mind that you're using the Star Wars prequels as a positive example of something, because I think how that handles these things is also wrong. Like, there's
absolutely.
There's problems with that as well.
But like, with all of the sets, it feels like, yes, they are in this location, but if you're just looking at a screenshot of it, it feels like they could go anywhere. Like, the entire thing is just one large open world. Whereas I think in this movie, every single set piece feels like you are locked into a 15 by 15 square and you are not able to leave. Even if you're just watching a single frame of it, regardless of motion, it feels like this is it. And like you said, that scene on the mountaintop is the worst example of that, because you can see the boundaries exactly where they are.
Yeah, and even when it's like a jeep chase in the jungle, which technically is moving through a lot of space, it just always feels like there's stuff moving around the truck that's effectively still. You know, there was never a shot in that entire sequence where the camera whip panned to see the trucks going by. If they did, would have changed everything. But they always kept it in pace with the trucks because they had to. Yeah, so obviously Harrison Ford's here as Indy. Makes sense. He's the star after all. Karen Allen's back as Marion. Joe was so... Oh, I can't really talk about this. I'll save this for spoilers, what I was about to say. Okay. But like Marion's back, obviously the love interest from the original movie. Although they save her till quite late on. They try and do like a little bait and switch here. And this isn't a spoiler because Karen Allen's here, you know she's playing Marion. But we get a different surname when she's mentioned early on, and it's almost meant to be like something to throw us, or at least throw Indy so that he's not expecting her.
I mean, they also changed her actual name. They call her Mary instead of Marion.
Well, I think one person calls her Mary, but someone definitely still calls her Marion as well.
I mean, Mutt calls her Mary in the first time. So
sure, but like, he's hardly calling his mother by her first name that often, is he? He's not used to it.
That's fair, but you still know what it is.
Well, again, that's probably just to throw Indy off so that he's not thinking her, right? So he can be surprised later. But yeah, Shia Labouf is here as Mutt Williams, who is the young adventure greaser character from the 50s, who we'll talk about in detail, obviously, in spoilers, but let's just say if this movie was a bigger hit, they were hoping that maybe the torch could be passed over to this young man.
Are you okay? Now I know you just recently did these on Ace. How many Transformers films were out at this point?
Only the first one.
Only the first one?
Yeah,
wow, okay.
First one's 2007, then this is 2008. So this is the height of Shia LaBeouf mania, where he was being pushed as the next big star in major blockbusters, and it felt like he was going to be around forever. And he's still around, don't get me wrong, but he's not... Like, he after those 3 Transformers movies, he was clearly just done with that type of movie, and he's off doing other things because he
didn't want to be the leading man anymore.
No. I think
he was too busy being an actual cannibal.
I don't know how painful or friendly this experience was. I imagine working with Spielberg's probably fairly nice, but 3 Michael Bay Transformer movies, he was done.
Yep.
I don't want to do any more of these. Get Mark Wahlberg for the next one. I'm out of here.
And everyone was better for it, right, Pete?
I mean, you're neck deep in piss, right? And someone's got a bucket of shit. Do you stay up and take on the shit, or do you dunk down under the piss? I mean,
that is a horrible metaphor, and I wish to erase it from my brain.
I stole that from the Angry Video Game Nerd. I can't take credit for it, but it was the perfect metaphor for what you just proposed to me.
I'll give you that.
I mean, I don't hate Shia LaBeouf. He's not. No. He's like, I do hate a lot of the things that he's in.
I was gonna say, like, for this movie, I going into it, everyone knows that everyone's like, Mutt's here. Mutt's the worst. Like, he's just a bad character. I gotta say, I didn't really dislike him all that much. He wasn't given a lot to do, but he wasn't the worst actor.
I do have to say, though, I burst out laughing at his intro. I forgot his intro was him slowly riding his motorbike out of like the smoke of the train, or the steam of the train, and he comes out and he's got this little cap on, and he's like, oh, he looks so funny.
It's it's the same issue. I forget what we were talking about. It's the same issue of you're trying to make your character too cool.
Yeah.
He's Shia LaBeouf. Like, slow your roll, guys.
Oh dear. Cate Blanchett's here as the villain.
Mm-hmm.
She's playing a Soviet, so it's not Nazis anymore. It's Soviets. Makes sense given the time period. Ray Winston's in here as kind of a
Mac.
As Mac. Yeah, he like, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I mean, we'll like, the movie goes back and forth quite a bit, so yeah, we'll see. John Hurt's in here in a relatively small role.
I mean, he's critical to the plot, but he's also, like we said in the last movie with I'm blanking on his name now, the old guy from the last movie.
Oh yeah, but
Brody.
Yes, yeah.
Brody. He's kind of filling that same sort of role of he was a mentor of Indy's, and also he's kind of the bumbling guy.
He's more of just a plot device in this. He's not even really a character in any real sense of the word.
I mean, we'll get to it in spoilers, I guess, but one of the things in the plot is that this character got into this adventure and then basically had to backtrack because he didn't have all the answers. And it's only once Indy joins him that they actually go through the whole thing. He gets like 95% of the way done, and Indy's just following him that whole time.
Yeah. That's a problem, because it does make it feel like the main character's not really achieving or doing that much in the large sense. So yeah, the actor who played Brody, I don't know if he passed away, if he just didn't want to come back. It's entirely possible.
I think he passed away like just a couple years after Crusade. He was very early on, yeah.
Oh, okay. So we kind of have Jim Broadbent, I should say, in his effective that role. Obviously, there's reference to Brody. We even see a photo of Sean Connery. The idea that, yeah, it makes sense that they've probably passed, given the age that Harrison Ford is now. It makes sense that his dad's gone. So we get references to them. Almost too many. I actually didn't. I remembered that there'd been a photo on the desk of Brody. I did not remember a big painting in the university and a goddamn statue that's used as a comedy beat at one point.
He was a very popular man.
Apparently so. But yeah, so Jim Broadbent, who I know from Only Fools and Horses, Americans won't know that, but you might know him from Hot Fuzz. He's the one that says, "A great big bushy beard." He's the dad in Hot Fuzz.
I know you're going to dislike how I know him, but I'll just throw it out there. Moulin Rouge.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, like, he's the voice of Christmas in Arthur Christmas as well.
He is Professor Slughorn in Harry Potter.
He's in a Harry Potter too, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah.
He's
People know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we have a reasonable cast. We got a couple of, like, big new names. We got our young guy who potentially could take the franchise forward, although given that I don't see Shia LaBeouf being billed heavily for Dial of Destiny, I suspect. Honestly, we'll get to it at the end. That's one of my biggest questions. Is it's so obvious that they didn't think they were ever going to do a fifth one. I want to see how they managed to carry on from this one. Yeah, I don't even know if Karen Allen's even going to be making it. So I have no idea how they're going to address. She's just going to have a picture right next to Sean Connery. Just be like, man, everyone's dead. So that's our cast. Is there anything else I want to even talk about? I have to go to spoilers just so we can actually talk about everything. I mean, the only thing, and like I said, we talked about it forever. I don't have an issue with the score, with the way like it's graded or anything like that. All that's fine. It is all just down to the CGI. Like everything that I technically hate about this film is in the CGI. And it's specifics we'll get into with plot, but if that's something that bothers you, that is absolutely something that you need to stay away from this movie for. Yeah. So spoilers then for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You have been warned. So the movie opens with firmly establishing the time period. We get a 50s style car with like 50s teenagers, you know. Yep. We get a... I don't remember what the song is now off the top of my head, but there was a 50s song playing as well. Hound Dog? That sounds right. I think it was Hound Dog. Yeah. And they're riding alongside like some of these soldiers who are driving in trucks, and they're try to get him to race a little bit. And the soldier gets into it, and it's just this is just your title sequence. Notably, they're using the same type of titles as Last Crusade and Raiders, meaning that Temple of Doom is the only one that went with the big flashy one for whatever reason.
I mean, I get it. I understand. I think I even said during Temple, it's a good eye catch, but at the same time, yeah, it only solidifies its odd man out status.
I think it's because the rest of them, all of them, including Raiders, even though it's the first one, all went for this sort of quiet, like, I wouldn't say this is moody, but the titles are like slow and they've got a moody font. You know, they're building up to like eventually seeing Indy, right? Whereas Temple, well, it still obviously didn't have him right away. He came into the scene after the song and dance.
Yeah.
I feel like the other ones all do this thing where it's like, okay, when are we going to see him? When are we going to see him? Whereas I don't feel like Temple quite had that. It was like, oh, this is just the opening number, and then, you know, and he walks. And yeah, they make a big deal of his entrance here where they get him out of the car. They've got him in the back of it, tied up. The Soviets already have him captive.
It is important to note that all the Soviets are posing as U.S. soldiers.
Yeah,
and they arrive at Area 51.
Yeah, we get that really memorable shot actually of the main guy coming up and kneeling down, and behind him there's the 4 other guys with guns who shoot all the guards.
And like it goes to the same thing I said at the end of Last Crusade. From a camera perspective, I get it totally. Like it's a good shot, but there were 2 guards there. Someone must have noticed the 4 soldiers in a line with guns standing behind the main guy.
I mean, they're thinking this is U.S. military, so... I mean, no, you're right. They're standing at different angles. They're not all facing dead on where they wouldn't notice this, but... you know, to be honest, it's a Paul Piano franchise, though. I can let those things go.
Like they're all very nitpicky. It's not something that actually like ruins my immersion or anything like that. It all comes down to there's a certain threshold of this is forgivable because Indy's always been a little pulpy, and then there's things that Shia Labouf does in the second half of this movie.
But they've got Indy. They do the whole thing where you see the hat first, and then we see the shadow of him putting the hat on, and eventually we see him turning around. And Ray Winston's there. They're working together. This is like his partner, who of course is going to betray him in like 5 minutes. Ray Winston secretly being a villain is like the most obvious thing that could happen, and they almost like try and double swerve you later, but then no, it's a triple swerve. He actually is a villain by the end.
Quadruple swerve practically.
Yes, but so here's the thing. Some may think I would probably complain that they're at the warehouse with all of the artifacts from the end of Raiders. Right? Now, I do think they go too far by showing the Ark at the end of the scene, you know, sitting in the box. But because they're there looking for something else, I actually think this is a smart, like, tactic to, like, you know, bring us back into the world and give us something that's a breadcrumb of something we know. Because they set up this warehouse... We saw the Ark go there, and there was thousands of other things there.
Yeah.
The idea that this movie's plot starts with like the bad guy stealing something from this place. Not the Ark, though. If it was the Ark, I'd complain. I would say, we're going back to...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This is the Death Star again in, you know, Force Awakens. Like, we're doing that.
It seems that somehow the Ark has returned.
Yes. But they're there for something else here, and we also discover this is Area 51, which I don't think they ever hinted at this, you know... and Raiders, that's what this warehouse was.
Oh no, not at all. This was just generic ass warehouse.
So yeah, so Indy does his magnetized test to find what they're looking for.
Okay, you say that as if it's just a totally normal thing here. So the whole bit is that the reason they kidnapped Indy is because the thing they're looking for, Indy actually like worked on. He supervised. So he was at the Roswell crash. Is the thing the movie is just hinting at.
Yeah, although they do make it clear later that him and a bunch of other people all worked independently and were never given the full picture, so he only has a fragment of the overall thing, and he was threatened with treason if he ever spoke about it to anyone else. So,
but his fragment is that the items of the box are heavily magnetized. And so what he does is he tells them, I need gunpowder, because the metal filings inside the gunpowder will basically act as a compass and will guide them towards this thing in the warehouse. And so what he does is he gets up on some boxes and he just throws it up in the air, and it moves like a nanobot cloud just through the warehouse. And I'm like, buddy, guy, I don't think you understand how magnets work. Because there's no way in any world that thing wouldn't already be like pulling from your hand if it were that strong of a field.
That is perfectly fair. I think I had less of an issue with this part of it. Not that I'm disagreeing with you. You're right. But I think I was on board well enough with this. But once they actually get close and he uses the shotgun like shrapnel to like, and it all goes to like, okay, that's kind of cool. It all goes through the boxes to find the one, and it's all sticking to the box. Once they actually start moving it, and we see that their dog tags are all starting to float towards it and stuff, part of me was like, but there's a lot of other metal things here that don't seem to be reacting to this as well.
Right?
Like,
yeah. And there's at one point, later on in the movie, we see that it's not just actual magnets. Like, it's magic magnets, and things that aren't metals that aren't even magnetized will also be drawn to it. So why wasn't the Ark of the Covenant, which was apparently super close by, just smacked onto the end of that thing being made of gold?
I mean, well, I'll give them some leeway in that that's quite heavy, and presumably the reason why the gunpowder... So, again, the rules they're giving me is that this gunpowder's light enough that the magnetization is strong enough to pull it from here, right? And then once you get closer, it starts pulling things like dog tags, and the guns and the swords start to like go towards it. So I'm not necessarily questioning why the truck they're moving it to isn't like sliding towards it, but part of me's thinking that just to like show that it is affecting it, like maybe if the brakes were on, maybe it would start to roll, you know, like it would start or something. Or at the very least, when they put it onto the truck, maybe have it feel like it sort of like clings to it, like dink, you know, like
have at some point have the truck do like a wheelie or a flip, and it somehow stays on. Just a tiny little thing like that.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, it felt like it was very selective as to what was being affected in the scene by the magnetism when it was close by. It's one thing when it's far away, but like even when like they were all next to it, it felt like it was very, some things are, some things aren't. And when you bring in later that, I'll be honest, I didn't even know that gold wasn't magnetic. I just assumed it would have been. But they tell us that it's not, and it's weird that that's also been attracted to this thing. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but it also opens up the bag of worms that...
Oh yeah, like that's the one thing that what got me later on in the movie when it said like, oh, it's magnetic and sucking up all this stuff, but like it's not actually supposed to be magnetic. This seems like the sort of thing that if you were to actually like hold it close to your body, as all of these people do, that you'd have like the Magneto blood being pulled out just from the iron in it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, because it almost has kind of worms where you're like, well, okay, if it's magnetic with gold and gold isn't supposed to be magnetized, then is gold the only thing that's magnetic that's not supposed to be? Because what else in this scene should be magnetic? But
even then, I think the worst part is that they focus so much on the first half of this movie of like, oh, this thing's magnetic and it does this stuff. But by the time you hit like halfway through the second act, it being magnetized doesn't matter at all.
No,
it does not play a fact.
Yeah, I think my thinking on a first viewing would probably be that this was going to be used, if not to solve a puzzle later, then maybe in like an action sequence they'll use the magnetization will save them because it'll hold on to something or something, you know?
Well, what they do is they switch out magnetism halfway through for mind control, and they just pretend like it's the same thing.
That is one of the big problems with this, is how it shifts to that, right? I do not disagree with that one bit.
Yep.
So, but I do think the rest of this scene plays out fun enough. Like, you know, Indy, like they have a bit of a standoff, and Indy ends up using his whip, and he starts running across the top of the boxes, and he's jumping from gunfire. And there's an okay little comedy beat where he like uses the whip to swing, and he tries to get to the truck, but the joke being, oh, he's too old and he can't quite make it, so he ends up swinging back into the other truck. That's a fun little bit. Like, I think most of the set piece of like this part, right, and even the next part where he's fighting the Russian dude, and they end up on, I don't even know what you call this thing, but the thing that goes really fast, this
rocket car, this rocket sled,
yeah, whatever it is, right? I was very really about to get upset because I remembered the nuke was coming, and I thought when he like backed into the button and the countdown started, I was like, wait, is that the nuke? Like, surely it's harder to turn on a nuke than just bumping it to one button.
Nah, man, this was back in '57. We didn't have any sort of safeguards.
But I did enjoy that because I appreciated when that slowed down eventually at the end. They're both like dizzy and they you can't really do anything. Like I was like, okay, that was a fun enough little bit. It had the hijinks of like the Indiana Jones franchise. Like this was all fine enough. Like I didn't really have too many major complaints. Like I get the magnetism as a problem, but for the most part, I was okay with things until this point. And then
now I want to pause you in that I do disagree somewhat.
Okay.
In that I think that this movie did a good job right up until the rocket sled. Because I think that him jumping through the warehouse, him doing that, it struck me as all the previous indie films where they give you the setting, they show you here's like what you're working with, a bunch of boxes and guys with guns and some cars. And they just play through all the different situations. They play through, okay, well, he's trying to swing to a car. They're shooting at him, but he's hiding behind boxes. Like they play through all of them. And I like all that. Same as you.
So what you're saying is that they showed you all the toys in the toy box and then used them all.
Yep. And I am totally cool with that. And then all of a sudden, to carry on the metaphor, they pulled out a different toy box. And they're like, look at my rocket sled. We're going to put this into play now. And they used it for exactly one thing and then threw it away. And that's where I feel like it's more so about the spectacle at that point than building a good scene.
That's a fair critique. I think that's perfectly valid. I think ultimately I'm not going to get that down on that just because we're just starting to go down the side of the mountain. And this is the least of the movie's problem. But you're right. Like this does come out of nowhere. You can kind of logic it a little bit and that this is a testing area and blah blah. But like it's not set up. That's fair.
Yeah.
Now, I do think the visual of Indy going through like a fake town that's there for eventual nuclear testing is an interesting visual. So I get a temptation to do that. But, like, there is no reason why there had to be a nuke test happening, like, this day. It just happens to be that way. So that Indy's now in this situation where he's in this fake town as a nuke's about to hit him. And what do we get? We get him hiding in a fridge, which the camera points out is lead-lined. We see that. And he survives a nuke by just hiding in the fridge. And not only that, the way this fridge bounces when the nuke hits, even if he survives the nuke itself, every bone in his body should be shattered the way he bounces in this fridge.
All right, let me throw this at you, and you tell me your opinion. Ignoring the explosion itself, because that is a completely, whether or not it should have atomized that fridge, ignoring that. With the bouncing around in the fridge, do you think that is more or less believable than out of the plane from Temple of Doom?
It's a good thing you said ignoring the explosion, because I feel like when you include the nuke itself, obviously it's more silly. But just the bouncing in the fridge versus the on the raft out the plane and then the way it flipped and flopped and landed in the water.
Yep. See, for me, I still come down on nuke. I still come down on, like, at least the raft had, like, air resistance so that it slowed stuff down.
Yeah, like, I would probably come down the side that the fridge is still more stupid, ignoring the nuke, because there's no way you would not be crushed and smashed and dead. At least with the physics with that raft was all weird, but at least it could flip just enough times that maybe, just maybe, you land just the right way that you won't immediately be killed, like, violently. Like, there's a fraction of a tiny percentage of a chance. So, I will say that this is still more silly. Obviously, when you factor in the nuke, which we literally see melting all the mannequins and, like, shattering all the buildings, I mean...
Like, I understand. You say that, like, it's a cool visual of them walking around in, like, this town. And I agree. I think it is. But it is so obvious from the moment this scene begins that the entire reason this scene exists is for that final shot of him coming over the hill and looking at the mushroom cloud.
Well, that's the thing. If you really want the shot of him with the mushroom cloud, then just have, like, the test happen when he's, like, on his way out. Like, have him still just escape, right? And just see it from a safe distance. And it was you get your big shot without us going, why? Like they've put themselves in this corner and then answered it with just this silly thing that I think for most people is just too silly. Like, I get you're setting a tone and you're saying this is the sort of silly, pulpy movie that we can do something this absurd in. Yeah. But I think Indiana Jones is liked more than that. It's liked in not in a super serious way, but in a more serious way than that. There are definitely levels to this. There's a gradient of like the appropriate amount of like, oh, not realistic but fun that we can roll with, and then there's a level of no, now you're just saying that there's no rules to anything and that nothing matters because you can just survive anything.
In the first movie, there was a scene, played for romantic reasons, but there still was a scene where he had to get bandaged up from being like stabbed and shot at. As soon as you have this scene, he is Superman. He is unable to be hurt by any blade or sword. Like it's done.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, he's invincible at that point, so it completely breaks the flow of, okay, well, I don't think that there's going to be even tension anymore, because how could anything even be a danger to him when theoretically God himself could not smite down Indiana Jones after this?
No, you're right. There's no tension after this. I think it's the main problem is that, you know, we talk about it feeling clean and sanitized because it's all the soundstage. You combine that with there being no threat of him actually being in danger or hurt, and you have something that's just so toothless, and it feels like just a nostalgia ride with nothing in it to actually give you any stakes or feel like anything is going to have any consequence. And that is the biggest problem with it. Like I say, I will stick up a little bit for the concept of like revolving the mystery around a traditional alien, right? And the idea that some culture has built something around it ends up being literal. They built a temple around the UFO, but like even without that part of it, like it would still be a fine idea. But when we get to the end, we'll talk about why it goes so. But even before we get to the end, what you were already bringing up with the magnetism turning into telepathy.
Not even that part. At this point they've already explained like, okay, here's this extra stuff going on, in that not only is it aliens and an ancient civilization that is like worshiping them. I'm also cool with that. That sounds like a great idea. But the city itself is El Dorado, the city of gold, which is its own myth, completely separate. And to mash those two together, it just feels like a hat on a hat. At halfway through the movie, though, we also throw in the Nazca lines, which are these mysterious geoglyphs, like massive drawings that were carved into the earth. It's too much. They're throwing in way too many things all into this one mystery, and they're pretending it's all the same thing. And that's what gets me.
That really feels like they really did not think they would be doing any more. Like, right. At the very least, it felt like Spielberg didn't think he would do any more, and that Lucas didn't think he'd be doing any more. So they wanted to throw in all the things they wanted to do.
I am borderline certain that there was some draft of this script where they were like, okay, and then the opening is Indy finds Bigfoot. Because it's like, why not? Just do it at this point.
That said, though, I do think that there is also sequel bait, and that the studio were hoping that Mutt Williams would continue the franchise. There's no denying that. Like, not only is it an obvious thing to do, but there's the thing at the end that is like, it looks you right in the camera and says, hey, he's the new Indy, right? He's going to be the new Indy.
Look, we're not going to directly hand him the torch, but like, if you as an audience were cool with that, we're gonna do that.
And then the audience said, no.
And they said, fair enough, we'll see you in 15 years.
When everyone's nostalgic again for Indy after you forget the stink of this one. So there's a scene here where Indy's being like debriefed by two FBI guys, which I want to point out because I actually really like one of these actors. Joel Stoffer, who was Enoch on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I actually knew the other guy, Neil Flynn, whose I think biggest role would be the janitor on Scrubs.
Yeah, I did recognize him, but like I like the other guy a lot, so I was like, ooh, it's Enoch. I've not seen this since I watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I was happy to see him. He also popped up in the last season of Stranger Things, so you know he's popped up around here or there. And then I was sad because then I was like, oh, we're never seeing these two again. Like, like. You set all this stuff up in this scene that they're suspicious of Indy because he was working with this guy that's turned out to be working with the Soviets, and you set up these themes. There's like a couple of lines and the next couple of scenes about how Jim Broadbent's complaining, oh, the government now, they're all suspicious of everyone looking for communists, that, our jobs are a threat. And then this is so, like, not relevant to anything the movie does for the rest of the duration.
Right, but I wanted it to be. I think that would have been a fantastic background theme to this, of this, like, who can you trust? And it's playing on the paranoia of the Red Scare. But instead, it's like the C plot in Mac's story. And even then, it doesn't matter of, like, communists or whatever. It's just Mac as an individual is a dick.
His thing, maybe it's there to stand in for that mistrust of people maybe being communists from this era. But it never feels like that. It just feels like, no, he's just a greedy prick who might be siding with the bad guys because he likes money.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
But, like, I could see this, like, one, because I guess now would be a decent enough time to talk about Cate Blanchett as the villain.
Yes.
Her whole thing, the entire reason that she's doing this is that she is well-renowned in Russia or whatever for her knowledge. She knows things before other people, and she believes that these, the Crystal Skull, which we'll get to...
Actually, before you get to that, in the opening scene, she seemingly tries to read Indiana Jones's mind.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't work, she goes, well, we'll have to go find this thing then, because it'll help me improve my ability. I'm like, did she actually have a telepathic ability before this point?
Who knows? I mean, I'm okay with that, leaving it as a mystery, that she's just like this enigmatic person who believes in all the hoodoo mysticism. I'm good with that.
That's fine. I just felt like they never really brought it up. Like, to imply, to imply that she maybe has some small telepathic ability, and then just never, like, the idea that she's got a thirst for it and that she's determined to find this because she wants to have super telepath powers, and that's why she wants to find the Crystal Skull and the hidden chambers of El Dorado, whatever. Fine, whatever. But although it would be nice if it, like, because I think with the earlier films when you had the Nazis looking for stuff, it always felt like it fit into this idea that Hitler's got his people looking for things that will make him even more powerful, and it always kind of fit into, like, the idea of what the Nazis were up to. Because how true any of them are open for debate. But there's always, like, been these horror stories of, like, them doing experiments trying to uncover superpowers, or bizarre shit like that. So it plays into those kind of myths and along with like that setting. Whereas here, I feel like these are Soviets because it's the 50s, but there's nothing about it really feels like it ties into Soviet interests.
That's the thing, is that barring Temple of Doom, if we're just talking about the Nazis, then it was never a thing of the individual believed in the hoodoo. It was more so that it was for the larger cause, except for the rich guy in Last Crusade, Donovan.
Yeah.
He kind of, but like, he wasn't even with the Nazis. He was just capitalist. So no, it was always a thing of, look, Hitler wants this thing and we're just after it. And the same thing with Indy, where he's like, look, the museum's going to get it. I'm just after it. Nobody really believed in the mysticism of it until they got their hands on it. This lady goes in and she's like, nah, man, there's some crazy stuff in that warehouse and you're going to get it for me.
Which doesn't sound on paper bad.
No,
right?
Not at all.
On paper, that sounds completely fine, that the villain actually gives a shit about what they're looking for.
But it's because she represents herself. She doesn't represent the Soviets as a whole.
Which I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that she doesn't really feel like she's representing the setting or the time period that they're in. It doesn't feel like she's tied to that, other than just they've given her the accent and said, oh, she's a Soviet, but it doesn't matter that she's a Soviet. It doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't really feel like it's an important part of her character.
We're not saying all the Soviets are crazy. We're just saying she's a Soviet and she's crazy.
Yes. I think that's a fundamental failing of it as well. We do see the school again. I'm glad they didn't try to give all the teen girls lusting after Harrison. It wouldn't have felt right, given that he's now an old man.
I was waiting for it, though. I was waiting for just like one background shot of a girl just like drawing a heart in her notebook or something.
If anything, what might have worked, I wouldn't need to do this, but what might have worked better as a reference to that is that he almost seems disappointed that no one's lusting after him anymore. Like, he got used to it, and now he's old, and he's like, no one's flirting? Okay.
You get the shot from Raiders with the girl who like slowly blinks her eyes, and it has something written on her eyelids. You get that where a girl's slowly blinking her eyes, and he looks over, and then she just does like a huge yawn because she doesn't even care about the class anymore. Just like, okay.
Or maybe he sees something written, but then he looks again and there's nothing there, or so, like just like he's not being lusted after anymore. But
yeah,
he is let go, or he's suspended at least, because the FBI think he's suspicious, and
He's on McCarthy's list.
Yeah, and that's basically the end of the FBI involvement or influence on the plot. It's just that.
Yep.
But he's going to go off looking for something. It doesn't really matter what, because Mutt Williams stops him. He's he's getting on the train, and this is where Mutt Williams comes in on his bike through the smoke, and he's got his little cap on, and he's I started laughing because like there's something just so like he doesn't fit it. Like he looks like a young actor who's been put in a costume and he's trying to have a look. Like I think trying to have a greaser in the movie for the time period does make a lot of sense, but
yeah, I think the biggest issue is the fact that he just doesn't like. I could see him in the 1950s, but I think he actually would have worked as like the jock. Like I could see him wearing a Letterman jacket. I can't see him as this dude who's always combing his hair back and is wearing the leather jackets. Even as I'm looking at him, I still can't see him in it.
I mean, I suppose it works to an extent in that, you know, it's made very clear that he's always trying to put on this tough act to prove that he's tough, right? He's try hard effectively. So I guess it kind of works in the sense that he wants to be seen as a greaser, but he always kind of looks like he's cosplaying as one. But he wants to put that across. That's fine. Actually, so I want to do a little. I was flabbergasted watching this because not too long ago, Picard season 3 ended, and there's some parallels to this movie that are.
Oh no!
Shocking, actually.
I'm so sorry.
So the idea that we get this young character shows up, it's revealed that he's Marion's son. And then later on in the film, she eventually, spills the beans that, oh, by the way, Indy, this is your son. You're his father. I'm not saying that's specific to these things, but because, both Picard is like the old actor coming back, we're doing the send-off, we're doing the nostalgia. Oh, shit, by the way, this young guy's your son. And you may be passing the torch to him if people like him. Don't get me wrong. Jack Crusher and Picard, much better than Mutt, right? He's much, much better. But...
Okay.
The parallels, like just the way it was like sort of like the way it was like, here he is, oh, it's her son, oh, it's also Indy's son. Like the steps of revealing it were just the exact same, and it kind of threw me for a loop when I was realizing it.
I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples of it, but really it only ever works in like franchises after you've been endeared to the character for long enough time, and then say, by the way, here's I guess the biggest one that would work for us is Batman. Where back in 2009, they were just like, by the way, Batman, here's your son.
Sure.
Throw him out there.
The difference being, of course, Batman hadn't been gone for decades and came back, and now we're trying to pass the torch. Like, I think that's almost like depressingly impressive about this movie is that this is from before we got all these nostalgia sequels and all these like continuations that feel kind of like fan fiction, but this really does hit all of the obvious beats of the fan. It's not fan made, but it feels like a fan fiction sequel where he's back with Marion, they're going to get married at the end, and he's got a son who could be the new Indiana. Like, it all just feels so predictable and obvious in a way that's not satisfying, and there's no, and I don't necessarily need there to be twists, but I just want it to feel like the creators had an idea to do something interesting, and instead it's exactly the safe cookie cutter thing that they could have produced,
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it feels like they had a very weak outline of like, okay, we want to do something with aliens and an ancient civilization. I saw it on History Channel one night. And then...
That's so right. This is probably when Ancient Aliens was on History Channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get that, they had a weak storyline there, but then the very next draft of the script was not improving the story. It was inserting the fans. It was inserting like, okay, we're going to have his and Marion's son. We're going to have the Ark of the Covenant's going to show up in this scene. We're going to have like all these little ditties for everyone to know, like, hey, we know it's been, I guess at that point, 20 years. Like, we know it's been that long. We remember you. We know what you want. And in the end, they didn't get it anyway, so...
So, we have a scene in a diner. Some Soviets come after them. There's some exposition here where he's like, yeah, Marion sent me this letter and blah, 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 blah. But it's all just like, this sets up we have to go to this other location. But we get this chase with the Soviets. We get the jocks and the greasers kind of thing in the diner to sort of distract the Soviets and get in the way. But this is the motorbike chase, which has the stunt work. It has Indy kind of like going into a car and like climbing out and climbing back onto the motorbike. It has the big ending in the library where they slide under the tables, which I want to point out here. The Indy here at the end of this scene says to the student who asks a question, if you want to learn anything about archaeology, get out of the library. This is directly contradicting the false advice that he gave them in Last Crusade, where he says, real archaeology is done in books, it's done in the library. It's not this adventure shit. And we knew he was lying, though, so maybe you could read this as him being like, oh no, he's more honest in his old age.
Yeah, this is the point where he's like, I'm done with this. Whoever wants to take over, by all means.
I'll give you a chuckle. You also get the comedy beat here where the car crashes into the statue of Brody in the head, like
which,
on them.
Having not watched Last Crusade, like before seeing this movie, back when I was a kid, I had no idea. Like, I didn't recognize it. I had no idea who that was, and I don't think the movie did a good enough job in movie of setting it up. So when it hit the statue and his head fell off, and they like paused on it for a beat, I was like, "Is that his dad? Is that who am I looking at here?"
I think it was too much. I think just having the one photo of him in the university would have been enough. Not that I have a problem with the photos of him and his dad on his desk, but I actually think there's a better moment towards the end to reference Sean Connery's character that felt more natural to me. When Indy calls Mutt Jr., I think that is the perfect reference that makes you think of the Sean Connery character without beating you over the head with it, that felt like a nice, like, you know, for all the things I don't like in this movie, him accepting his son by calling him Junior, like Sean Connery called him, was the perfect way to do it without you know. You have
him say Junior, and then you have Mutt say, "Don't call me Junior." That's it. Perfect. That's all you needed.
That is perfect. He did ruin it a little bit by saying, your grandfather's looking down and laughing. I'm like, you didn't need that part. You're overdoing it now. But just calling him Junior and having him react properly, that's actually the perfect way to make that reference and make you think of the dad and make you feel like the legacy of those movies is still very much all, a part of this, right?
Except for Temple of Doom.
I was going to say the line that Indy has where Marion says, I bet there was tons of women after me, and he says something like, there were a few, but they all had a problem, they weren't you, which is meant to be a sweet line. I was going to say, maybe that's kind of a reference to the love interest, but no, that was set before, so that doesn't even count in that.
Exactly.
Willie doesn't even count in the post-Marion woman.
Can I, that's also just one thing I want to throw out here. They say the timeline is Raiders happened.
Yes.
They were apparently slated to get married, and Indy basically ran out a week before the wedding.
Yes.
Did that all happen before Last Crusade?
I think so. Which, by the way, the only love interest that we got for Indy then that's set after Raiders was the one who turned out to be a Nazi, and her only problem is she wasn't married.
I mean, I'd assume that there's some, because obviously in the middle of that, World War II happened. So I'd assume that there was something there, but...
Oh, no, I'm sure there was other love interests in his life. I'm just saying that from an audience perspective, the only one we actually have that's set after Marion turned out to be a Nazi.
I mean, that would have been a much better line. It's like, there were plenty of other women. What was wrong with them? They were Nazis.
There was one that
just kept happening.
There was one that I kind of liked, but she turned out to be a Nazi,
Also, she slept with my dad. Anyway.
Of course. Oh, dear. Which, I mean, hell, if he really wants to bond with his son, maybe he should go out and sleep with Mutt's girlfriend at some point.
Oh, yeah, exactly. He's like, so Mutt, you seeing anybody?
So, yeah, they go to... Was it Peru? They go to find this.
Yep. They go to the Nazca lines, basically. Yeah. Which I do want to. This part of the movie is a lot of Harrison Ford just educating not only Mutt but the audience. I understand. All the movies have had a brief little segment where Indy's like, "Oh, this is that thing, and it leads to this other thing." I'm cool with that, but it feels like we're on a science show at certain points in this movie. Like at one point they go down into this crypt and Mutt gets stung by a scorpion and he freaks out, rightly so. And then Indy's like, don't worry, Mutt. If it's a big scorpion, they're actually less venomous. And I'm like, this entire sequence meant nothing. Why are we doing a science lesson on scorpions?
I think in the moment I assumed that meant that a villain was going to get bit by a small scorpion later, and we would know as the audience it was dangerous because he said that to us. But
yeah,
I don't think it ever came up.
There's ants. We get ants, but even they're huge. So
yeah, you don't want big ants though. Big ants are bad. Yeah, big ants are bad. Yeah, no, it's. I feel like after the opening, there's never really any stretch of time where Indy's on his own being an adventurer. He's either just with Mutt, or we get to the point where he's literally with like 4 other characters. Like the entire third act, he is with a team of characters who are constantly there with him. He's never on his own doing stuff. And don't get me wrong, the other movies did have him often with one other character at various points, but there was always parts where he would go off and do something heroic on his own. Yeah. And it felt like maybe, again, it's an age thing where it's like, oh no, to disguise the fact that he can't do as much physically, we have to always have him in a group so that we can do, the more actiony thing can be Mutt. And then he can interact with Ray Winston, he can interact with Mary, and he can interact with eventually John Hurt, whoever it is. But I felt like there was just a lot of like too much of a group vibe as the movie went on. Yeah.
I mean, especially the fact that it consistently, almost at like a heartbeat sort of pace, it kept growing. It wasn't like it's all of a sudden shot up by like 3 or 4. It was, we have Mutt. Now we have Mutt and Marion. Now we have Oxley, Mutt and Marion. Now we have Mac back as well. And it just kept going up until you hit the end of the movie. And you're in like the final room and there's like 8 people there.
Yeah. No. It felt like too much of a group dynamic for most of the movie. And so they go to this crypt looking for the crystal skull, which was originally here, but then it turns out John Hurt put it back here for Indy to find.
Right.
Which, okay. This is where we get the part time. There's a little good moment here because there's like a tribe that are hiding around. The first time one of them moves in this pit with like a mask on, it actually has a effectively creepy little moment where it's like, oh, they're actually jumping in and like hiding again and going into these little crevices on the walls or whatever it is. And okay, that was effective enough.
I think it was less effective the second time they did it in the same movie.
I agree with that. I think what really got me the second time though, which is in the third act, is that when they're coming out of the bits of the wall, it's crumbling like they've been in there a long time, and I'm like, wait. Right? Like, surely this is something they come in and out of because they're, living their lives.
Turns out the Holy Grail just fell down into a pit and one of these guys got it, and they've just been chilling in the walls ever since.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately from here, as soon as they came out with the crystal skull, the bad guys are there. They get captured. So we get a whole section where they're in a camp with the bad guys. This is where John Hurt is. It's also where Marion is. They all get introduced here, effectively. Yep. Until Mutt just decides.
I think this is like exactly halfway through the movie.
Something like that,
more or less.
And there's a whole scene where like they try and connect Indy's mind with the skull because the skull messed up John Hurt's mind, right? Oxley's mind was messed up by the skull, and that's why he's sort of talking gibberish. But you can kind of like, if you know what he's talking about, you can kind of understand parts of it, and that's what they're hoping Indy's going to be able to do. But Indy is like hooked up to it. And apparently he hears enough from it to know that this thing wants to go back to where the rest of the skulls are. It wants to go back to El Dorado and join the matching set so something can happen, right?
Which, like, I don't... Like, it feels like they forgot what this prop was for in between these scenes. Because they have this whole thing of they're literally having Indiana Jones hold it, looking dead at it, holding it up to the audience to look at, holding it up for Mutt to look at, and just like, what is this thing? It's magnetic, but it's to weird things. What's going on? Next scene happens, and we're told that, oh, if you stare into its eyes, it's just going to entrance, like, you can't look away, and your mind's just going to melt. It's a completely different story. That's entirely separate from what we were seeing before.
Which I wouldn't have a problem so much with it being able to do both, but the magnetization never comes up again, I don't think.
Right. And what's also weird is the fact that the opening scene, now we've always said that, like, the opening scenes of these Indiana Jones films are just his last adventure.
Yeah, which is not really true in this case.
Right. This is still this adventure. It's just a different part of it. But what's weird is that it was all to get the corpse of the alien that was in Roswell. And they bring it back in this scene with Cate Blanchett saying, I thought that skull would work just as well. Turns out it didn't. So we're just going to go with your skull. So the entire reason we got that alien out of Roswell is just entirely for the purpose of like, no, they're not just carved out of stone or crystals. They're real aliens. Wow.
Yeah. Matt just decides to start fighting and they make a run for it. Is basically which, and they don't get away because they end up. It's not quite quicksand. They said something else.
It's a sand pit or something. What it actually is a 15 by 15 set where you can very clearly see the borders of.
Yes. All of these scenes at the camp, the scenes at the dig site before where the native people were attacking them, like all these scenes felt super like soundstagey to me.
Yep.
But yeah, so the whole thing here is they use a snake as a rope to like pull Indy out. He doesn't want to, which it's like I get that you want to fit in somewhere Indiana Jones reacting to a snake because it's his gimmick. He's scared of snakes.
Sounds like a YouTube algorithm nightmare.
I know, but
Indiana Jones reacts to a snake.
But I don't know, it felt so forced to me.
Oh yeah,
and I couldn't help but feel
it's forced because you just look around on the trees and there's plenty of vines. Any of those would have worked.
Or a branch, just a longish branch would have done the trick. But instead, we're doing the snake for the comedy, and I also just can't help but feel like, you know, like actually gripping the snake tight enough to be pulled out of a pit like this would be like it probably deeply damaging to the snake.
Oh no, that snake is dead.
Yeah, no, I mean I don't really like snakes, but I still, you know, it's weird that no one seems to care about the snake's well-being at all.
I was gonna say if the snake like. When they were down in the pit in Raiders, those snakes were actively coming after them to kill them.
Yes.
And, like, they were venomous. Like, that makes sense of, okay, these snakes, it's either them or me. This one, they go out of their way to say, like, this snake is harmless. It can't possibly hurt you. Rip its head off.
So the bad guys just get them again, and then we have the truck sequence where they start fighting back, right? We have a little bit of banter with them in the back of the truck where this is where the "you're the father" thing comes up.
Yeah.
I just realized if they rephrased it slightly, they could sort of do a play on Empire, like, Indy, you are his father. No,
that's impossible.
And there's like a running gag that starts about here where Mutt doesn't like that Indy and Marion are being flirty and stuff. Like they're you know.
So I do want to bring up at this point just one of the little trivia bits I found.
Oh, go on.
Is that they say, okay, how did she get the last name of Williams? And turns out that after Indy left, she was already pregnant with his son, obviously. And there was a British Air Force pilot named Colin Williams, who Indy actually introduced them to. And she married him. And that's the guy that Mutt thought was his father until he died in the war. Turns out that I saw an interview with the guy who basically is the keeper of Indiana Jones continuity. Like, he keeps track of that stuff for Lucasfilm. He's the same guy who also does it for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that they were told was off limits to write about in any, like, side stories or extra materials is how Marion's and Colin's life happened post-Indy. That's the only thing they were never allowed to explore.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which it's such a specific little bit, and I don't understand why. Because personally, I think it would be kind of interesting. Of like, oh, you have this pilot guy; he could go on adventures as well. You could have a little side story to Indiana, but nope, it's just Colin, accountant.
I don't know. It's interesting in that they don't want it. It's not interesting otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we get our big scenes here where at one point a truck actually like drives over their truck and like takes off the top of the truck.
Right. So they're going through the jungle and the truck in the lead is this giant like saw truck that's meant to mow down trees.
Yeah, it's cutting down the trees and stuff, yeah.
So that's meant to clear a path for these other trucks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a very dense jungle. So the first truck they destroy is the saw truck. And then they proceed to go on a 4-mile long trek through this jungle without any paths being cleared. Does that sound about right to you?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay. It just seems a bit weird to me, the fact that they made the point of we have to clear out the jungle, and then at no point is there anything in their way. the entire rest of the time.
That is fair. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's hard to kind of sum up. There's a lot of the usual like punching and like kicking out of the trucks and things like that. But obviously, none of it's anywhere nearly as good as the one from Raiders.
No, not even because it's all fake. It's not there. The one thing that they do really comment on is that apparently Mutt dropped out of school, and one thing that he was good at was fencing. So they decided to make that his thing. He can't handle a whip, but he can sword fight.
So yeah, he sword fights with Cate Blanchett when they're both standing in different trucks, going side by side. And then he gets caught up in a vine, which leads to him swinging through the trees with the monkeys.
You know what's great is I'm looking at the IMDb like synopsis here, and they don't talk about it. They don't even want to bother with it. Does this serve any story purpose? Does this scene help the story at all? That he is on the truck with his father, he's suddenly caught up in a vine, and then he swings his way back over to the truck where his father is.
It's much like the nuke the fridge thing. It feels like just this tacked on extra thing that the scene doesn't need, right? That the movie doesn't need. And maybe it's to like, hey, he can swing through trees, he can sword fight. See, that's why you want him as your next indie hero. Yeah. Right? That's what they're going for, maybe. But I don't know, George Lucas, like, he likes cutesy shit. You know, we haven't even mentioned the what was it at the start? The animals at the start.
The
gophers.
They're not. Yeah, they're like gophers or meerkats or something.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of emphasis on them, and then even like when Indy, like after the nuke, he lands next to one and looks at it, and it's like, wait a minute, and I'm like, yeah, this is the guy who liked Ewoks. Like that, the guy who put this in here obviously liked the Ewoks, because this is the sort of shit, and the monkeys feel the same to me. It's like, oh, there's a bit with the monkeys, and
I mean, I don't. The only thing I could think if is not trying to sell Mutt as look how great he is in all these situations, is that George Lucas just went back down into that well of, I can merchandise the crap out of some cute little animals. And that's the, like, even if the fact of nobody's going to buy the Indiana Jones themed gopher toy, but he there was something in him where he's like, I have to put something cute because kids like cute.
It's his thing. And even if we're going to like compare more things to like his sensibilities and how he does things in Star Wars, specifically the prequels, because they're more relevant, because they're more near this, is John Hurt rambling and not being able to make any sense or string a sentence together is a lot like one of the droids in his Star Wars movies, or or even I don't know, like I'm getting some of those vibes.
Yeah, I can see it. I think I do want to point out here that I think this movie was done a major disservice by the fact that, like, a decade later, John Hurt starred as the Doctor in Doctor Who for a special, and he's basically kind of doing the same exact dialogue the whole way through, but it's so much better there than it is here.
That is accurate. I've seen that part of Doctor Who, and I don't love Doctor Who by any means, but it's definitely better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Well, most of it. Some of it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Obviously, there's a lot of episodes of Doctor Who, okay? It's got its ups and its downs. But,
absolutely.
Yeah, so we do this whole thing here where the truck ends up in the water, right? In fact, I can't just say that. I can't just gloss over this.
No, you cannot.
Marion drives off a cliff into a big tree that's very springy, and it just lowers them down safely into the water.
See, this is George Lucas. He went on to those forums where everyone was complaining about the raft in Temple of Doom. And he's like, fine, I'll lower the boat safely into the water. You happy now? And everyone went, no, because that's equally stupid. But regardless.
It's just more stupidity. And then I got really annoyed at the characters, because John Hurt keeps saying, oh, there's 3 drops. And like Marion keeps going, what does he mean? And I'm like, it's obvious there's going to be 3 waterfalls, you idiots.
See, he says it much, much earlier on, before we're even on the river.
Yeah.
And I get that from a sense of, okay, we're setting it up and then we're paying it off. But there's no reason he should have thought they would have been in a boat at this point. Like,
yeah.
He could have just taken the hill down.
Yeah, I think you have to go through the water though, because you have to go then through the top of the waterfall where the big skull on the side of the mountain is to go into.
I mean,
the
you say
secret
that,
city.
but doesn't what's her name get there as well? And I don't think she went over the waterfalls.
Not over the waterfalls, but you still have to go down the 3 drops.
Yeah,
to get,
okay, fair enough.
You know,
as long I guess the drops I was taking to literally mean the waterfall itself.
But yeah, they go down 3 waterfalls and land very neatly each time in this. It's not even a boat; it's a truck. It's a truck with the top of it cut off.
The first 2 they land neatly in that they're all still in the boat. The third one they die.
Oh yeah, the third one. Yeah, the third one does split them all out. Yeah.
They come out of the boat. The boat is destroyed.
They are all fine, though. None of them have a scratch on them.
Yep. Which, again, just goes back to that sanitized thing. Like, I think they're perfectly dry not more than, 10 minutes later.
Yeah, so they go through and, there's a bit of, caves, whatever, temple shit. Oh, there's natives here who are protecting the actual main part of all this. But luckily they're scared of the skulls, so we get through that quite quickly.
Sorry, something that we skipped over because of the monkey swinging scene was the giant ant scene.
Oh yeah, a dude gets consumed by a swarm of ants.
I think that's the grossest the movie ever. This whole sequence is the grossest the movie ever gets because Cate Blanchett also squishes 2 of these giant ants, and they go through the extra effort to have the guts of the ants hit the lens.
Well, honestly, I think there's not a better way to show the sanitization of the way the movie's made versus the old ones, and the Cate Blanchett's eventual demise, right, which is supposed to be the gross out, the villain goes in a really nasty way, which all the other 3 movies had, right? They had the base melting at the end of the Raiders, you had the Gators, and the third one had the aging thing, right, with the guy drinking the Grail. This one, in theory, I can see the effect when she's pulled up into this portal and her body's kind of ripped apart as she goes. In theory, that sounds quite gnarly, but because it's all CG, it just never has that disgusting quality that any of those earlier 3 movies had.
She just Thanos snaps out. She just dissolves into ash before she gets up there.
But there's a little hint of the layer under her flesh. You can see a bit of red, you can see a bit, and I think they were going for that gross out, but it's so, like you say, CG and so Thanos, and just snapping the fingers, that it just never has that bite to it. But so I'm okay with a temple being built around a UFO, right? The problems I have with this ending, there's a couple of them. One is, for some reason, they tack on this thing where John Hurt says, oh, they're not from space, they're interdimensional demons, or aliens. And I'm like, but why? Why are you tacking that on? They look like classic aliens. This is a classic flying saucer. Just stick to the... But for some reason, it doesn't add anything to anything in the movie. It doesn't, give it a layer or a theme that plays with other things. It's out of nowhere he says, no, they're from another dimension.
The only thing that I could think when they said it is the fact that they didn't want to have to explain oh, Star Wars is actually also in the indie canon because aliens are real and they just came from a galaxy far, far away. It's just, no, they're totally separate things. We don't have to discuss that.
To me, it just felt like an extra detail to add on just for the sake of... See, it's not exactly the classic sci-fi thing you were thinking the whole time. There's an extra layer to it, but it's not really. It's a couple of lines of dialogue that mean nothing because it's still a big flying saucer that comes out of the ground. But the other problem I have, right, other than just the wall of CG, is this flying saucer's going up and all, and it's just, again, it's like Indy with the mushroom cloud where he's looking up at all the rocks falling down of the flying saucer.
It's the exact same shot. Yeah. They've just mirrored the shot.
But the other big problem though is I'm okay with finding, the skull or the skeleton of an alien and it being this, this is fascinating. That'd be quite interesting. Oh, there was an alien that landed here thousands of years ago. These cultures built stuff around it or used their technology to build some of their stuff, and maybe that explains how certain pyramids were built, because some of that's a bit of a mystery. It's how did they pull this off with their technology at the time? That kind of thing. That'd be all fine. Where it completely and utterly loses me is that as soon as the skull's put into, the skeleton, right, is that all the skeletons merge into one and we get an actual living CG alien that forms out of it. This is shit. This is just shit.
And they even try to justify it 30 seconds before. Nothing in the movie justifies it, but then 30 seconds before, they say, oh, they were a hive mind, one being with a split consciousness. And as if that's supposed to be this justification for why a living, breathing alien has just been chilling here for so long. And that's the other thing, is that the timeline doesn't even add up, because what they had was these aliens showed up like 5,000 years ago to teach this culture how to do stuff. And then in the 1500s, some conquistadors showed up and took one of the skulls. So that means that they were intact in their skeletal forms for like 1,500 years minimum. And then only in these last 500 years, it's like, oh, actually, I really want to be put back together again so I can go back into space.
No, back into the space between spaces.
Right, my bad. That's the important part. And that stuff 100% agree with. It's needlessly complicated. This entire movie has been needlessly complicated rather than just a simple little story of like, we have the MacGuffin, or we want to get to the MacGuffin. How do we do this?
I think the idea that aliens were here and there's some like evidence that there were aliens is far more interesting than, oh no, the alien's actually here and alive and we get to see it wave goodbye before it leaves. Like, that to me just robs everything of like the mystique of it, because it's just, oh, here's the CG alien. Here he is. Even
then, if you want the ship flying away at the end, you can remember at the beginning of the movie where Indy hit the control panel for the rocket sled and it started going off? Same thing. Just have it be, this is an uninhabited ship. You hit some buttons or something gets triggered, and the ship automatically starts taking off.
Honestly, even better than that, just have it so that when the skull gets put in, the ship was meant to go home, so it just autopilots. It just turns on and starts to rev up, because like, oh, no, it's set to go home after a certain amount of time, and it's been wanting to do so for a while, and now that the skull's back, it's all just automatic. But no, they have a shitty CG alien who's alive, who reforms.
Who's a genie, mind you. In that, as soon as it gets back together, it says, "Thank you for freeing me. What is your wish?" And Cate Blanchett says, "Tell me everything." And then her brain explodes.
Yes.
Or catches on fire, I guess. And I also just want to throw out the fact that before they get into the main room where these crystal skulls were all kept, there's a little it's that room from The Mummy. It's that room from National Treasure, where it's all the treasure that you could possibly want. And Indy makes the point of, they were archaeologists. These aliens were collecting things from all these ancient cultures in order to study them, because they themselves were archaeologists. I don't know about you. I just found that to be the stupidest little, like, oh, see, we're not so different sort of thing. Like, they're all we're all Indiana Jones a little bit, you know?
Again, conceptually, I don't hate that idea. Like, see if you had a mystery here that was like, okay, the first, like, there's 3 different things, say, that all feel like they shouldn't fit together. And then the reason why they're all kind of involved in the same mystery is because, no, this alien force, like, was dipping into all of them, and that's why they're connected here in the plot of the movie. I'd be kind of okay with that, but I don't think it's set it up well enough that it just feels like a throwaway line when they get here. You know, it's just kind of like out of nowhere, here's another idea, as opposed to paying off something that was actually properly set up earlier. I think that's my big thing.
It feels that's I think the biggest issue here is just the lack of focus on how they wanted to tell this story. In that the first 3 movies, everything was even like linked in a time sense. Despite the fact they were going after ancient relics, all the clues and stuff they were following were from a very specific point in time when this thing was last seen. The first movie was like ancient cultures. Last Crusade was more focused on these knights during the Crusades. This one, you have clues coming from the Nazca lines, which are thousands of years old, and then some random crypts from conquistadors, which are only hundreds of years old. Like, it's too thinly spread out across the eras.
Yeah, and we've barely even mentioned Ray Winston like turning face and heel back and forth, because it
doesn't matter.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. Like, you know, and at the end of the movie, he basically just winks as he's about to die because he's like, I'll be all right. I'm a scoundrel. And he just dies.
he winks and is like, don't worry, Indy, I'm going to be okay. And then he lets go of the whip and you hear him screaming in agony as he gets pulled away. And I'm like, oh, I don't think he's okay, Indy. That sounded pretty brutal.
And then they have a nice little moment. This is where he calls Mutt Jr. Waiting for, I guess, the next day to make their way somewhere. And we just cut ahead to like Indy and Marion getting married. As we also see, he's been promoted at work. He's now assistant dean or something.
Yep, associate dean.
Associate dean. That was the phrase. And we see them at the wedding, and you know, there's a little detail here that's all right, where he says, "You may kiss the bride," and she jumps in and kisses him first. That felt very like, okay, that's Marion. Okay, that's a fine little thing. You know, that to me works better of saying this feels like the same character. Compared to, oh, she says, you know, well, Indiana Jones, and like puts her hands on her hips the same way when she first sees him. Because you're doing the exact same moment. I'm like, wait, is this how she always greets him? Because now it feels like a bit. Whereas this feels like, no, this is how this character would actually, like, you know, defy your expectations. It's like, no, I'm not waiting for the man to kiss me. I'll kiss him when I want to, because I'm a feisty woman. Whatever.
Marion is strong. She is able to do these things. We've established that.
Right. That feels like a better way to call back to who her character is than doing the exact same beat for beat, hands on the hips. Well, Indiana Jones, smile, you know. So, but the egregious thing here at the end is the gust of wind blows Indy's hat towards Mutt. Mutt picks it up. He looks at it.
The music swells.
Yeah, he's going to put it on, and just at the last second, Indy like takes his hat and puts it on his own head and sort of, you know, pips it a little bit. And it's like the credits start to roll, and the movie's like, hey, he's next.
Yeah.
Here's your new
Please
Indiana Jones.
fill out your survey cards now, located to the left of your seat.
And here we are, like, amazingly 15 years later, and there was never even a whiff of a Mutt-led movie. Not even a whiff. And not only that, we're getting a movie here where he probably will just be mentioned in a throwaway line. Oh, I've got a son. He's off doing something, and that'll be it.
Mutt died in a motorcycle accident. Let's be honest.
Mutt went back to his home planet.
And died on the way.
Yeah.
So just a few little things I wanted to throw out here that are super small and nitpicky, but just like really bothered me in how they broke the continuity that was established in the first three movies.
By all means.
First and foremost was when he first meets up with Oxley, he tries to get attention because like, hey, look, it's me, it's Indiana. And then like he looks around, it's just like, it's Henry Jones Jr. These two were supposedly friends. Like they worked together underneath their mentor, which we established was whoever, it was Ravenwood, her dad, Marion's dad. These two were supposedly coworkers. And we saw in Last Crusade that he had been going by Indy since at least like his early teenage years. So why did he think that calling himself Henry Jones Jr. was going to get his memory jogged any more than saying Indy?
No, you're right. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yep. And then the other issue I had was, it's not so much, I guess, an issue of continuity as much as just I really don't like the way they handled it. Is that during this scene where they make their way to the temple in the middle of El Dorado, these people, these natives, are actively trying to kill them. And the only thing that holds them off is the fact that he's got the crystal skull and he's just waving it around, and apparently they're all scared of it. How did they established he got to this point. Oxley got to this point and then had to turn back around. How did he manage to go back this way? At a certain point, you would imagine that as he's walking through the crowd, someone's going to like stab him or shoot him with a poison dart or something.
That's a big problem with Oxley. Again, he's barely a character and he's just kind of a plot device. And then when he does become himself during the ship turning on at the end and he starts speaking coherently, and Indy's like, oh, good to have you back, old friend. We've never met this person. We have never met the real person. So, like, it doesn't mean anything to us that he's back to himself. So, when we see him at the end, like, he's at the wedding clapping and he's all clean shaven, it's like, we don't know you. We never met this man.
Yeah. I mean, I would even put that to Jim Broadbent's character as well, in that they had the same sort of talks that Brody and Indy had over the original.
Yeah.
And obviously, they would have reused Brody if they had him. Obviously that's the case. But if you're still going to have the exact same character as Brody, give him something that is his own. Instead, like the first time we get introduced to this character, he makes the big reveal that in order to make it so that Indy isn't like arrested, he resigned from his position as dean. I don't care. I've never met this man. I have nothing that he's been dean, and I don't know how they've interacted. It's just this thing where they expect you to just put him on the same level that Brody was and just run with that emotional carriage.
He's just Brody 2.0, and we're expected to care because of that. It's all kind of like one of the things going into this next one is that I've heard is that, you know, a lot of the review blurbs on Rotten Tomatoes, because it's not the score's not good. But a lot of those scores in blurbs, even the positive ones, it kind of sounds like it's all about recapturing the past and it's scared to do anything really new. It's all about capturing the nostalgia and all that stuff. And I already feel that in this one, so I can't imagine doing this again, but feeling even worse with that. You know, we'll see if it ends up being worse or better than this movie overall. But actually, before we talk about our feelings, because I think we'll rate it before we do that. But one little just note here, this is not a positive or a negative, but the Lucasfilm logo plays before the Paramount logo at the start of this, and normally you wouldn't see that, because typically the bigger studios that are distributing the movie will always go first, whether it's Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, whatever. And I remember, I want to say it might have been the Dawn of the Dead remake, of all things, where they wanted to do this thing. It may have been a different zombie movie, but they wanted to do this thing where the Universal logo went red, and then it was like blood, and it would transition into like the world's infested, and then it would do like a fancy transition into the movie. And they couldn't do it because we've got like 3 logos we have to show, and Universal has to go first, so we just can't do it. But obviously with Paramount, you have the famous transition. Here it's the little molehill or whatever it is from the Paramount logo. So clearly, I don't know if it's just because there's different contracts here and Lucasfilm's so big, or if it's just because Spielberg has got enough sway that he said, hey, Paramount, we want to do the fancy transition. Can we put you second?
He basically just walked up into the executive's office and he's like, guys, we've been doing this for 3 movies now. Do you really want to be the one that breaks tradition?
And I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure Paramount were like, yeah, we want the fancy, because it's good for them to have that fancy transition.
It wasn't even the modern Paramount logo. They went back and used the old Paramount logo.
That is very true. So I wanted to point that out because I thought it was an interesting little tidbit. But
I mean, that's the whole thing between like where actors get credited and where like everything has to line up. So many guilds, so many laws. The fact that if they did have to go through some hoops to make it work, I'm glad that they did, because as much as it isn't the biggest reveal of it's literally a pile of dirt, I'm at least happy that they kept that going. It felt nice.
Yeah, there's like the idea that we couldn't do a little traditional thing that's harmless because some contract says no, something that has to go first would just be stupid and annoying.
He can't shave his mustache. You have to CGI it out.
Although, speaking of guilds and shit, though, the Writers Guild's on strike right now as we record this.
Yes.
They'll probably still be in strike by the time this comes out. And the Actors Guild's apparently voting, well, no, they should go on strike soon, so.
So what we're saying is, we're not going to get Ghostbusters this year.
Oh, no, that script's already done. Well,
I was saying the actors, though.
Oh, yeah.
The actors go out.
Oh, imagine if everything has to shut down production because the actors go on strike.
Oof.
Oh dear. Yeah, that would quickly affect things.
Mm-hmm.
That would very quickly affect things. But yeah, so that's rate Crystal Skull, and then maybe we can do a little bit of like what we expect from the Destiny of Dials. What are you rating?
Whatever that's called.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be anything great, can it? After everything we've just said, I can't turn around and be like, it's an 8.5. Triumph in film.
I'd be concerned. Well, here's the question, actually, before you get to the rating itself.
Okay.
How much worse, or if you're going to shock me, how much better than Temple of Doom do you feel with this?
Than Temple of Doom? Okay.
It's the obvious one to compare it to, because it's the one we agreed was the weakest before.
Yeah, that's fair. I personally think this is definitely worse than Temple of Doom, because at least Temple of Doom, it tried some new things. It didn't land all of them, but all of them still felt Indiana Jones. All of them still felt in that action adventure genre. And this just feels like a completely separate thing. This, again, it's of course partially because it's so much longer after the fact, but it also comes down to the things that they're trying just don't fit in with the vibe of what I consider to be Indiana Jones. The atomic bomb thing going off, aliens coming together. These are all things that could have worked in some version of the script, but with all of them combined, it just strayed way too far off of what I consider to be core indie. So with all that, I gotta say I like this leaps and bounds less than Temple of Doom.
Yeah, I wouldn't say leaps and bounds. I think overall I would say that, yeah, this is worse than Temple of Doom. I will say that I do find this a little easier to watch, particularly earlier on for whatever reason. I think Temple of Doom I find like really great pacing wise in the first half or so.
That's fair.
But that said, though, I still enjoy how that movie's made more. I enjoy the action towards the end way more because it feels like it's still... this is kind of like, you know, when you have John McClane back in Die Hard 4, or you have Harrison Ford back as Indy in this one, on some level, like, they've just aged so much that I just don't like seeing them try to be these roles anymore. I'm like, you're not John McClane anymore. You're not Indiana Jones anymore. You're an old man now. All I see is Harrison Ford or Bruce Willis now. I don't see... Because... Basically, what I'm saying is that there's once enough time has passed, I'm saying the window is closed to really make it feel like an actual proper part of the saga.
I think the window can still be open. I don't think that it's impossible not to, but you can't have the same type of story.
Yeah.
It needs to then evolve into a different type of story of, like, you know, the Sunset Years, the story of how things are not as easy to do, and this is the one last gig sort of story.
It varies. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think Rocky Balboa did a decent job with doing it with Rocky. That was a fairly successful attempt at it. I think there's definitely situations where it's worked and when it has or hasn't. Yeah. But like the reason why I bring up Die Hard 4, I think specifically, because I remember feeling just like, well, wait, we've got Die Hard 4. I want to like it because I really like the Die Hard movies, and I just remember feeling like it's not Bruce Willis's fault that he's completely bald now, but like something about it just doesn't feel like John McClane anymore. He feels like he's just doing a typical Bruce Willis role. And well, don't get me wrong, I think Harrison Ford makes more of an effort here to sound like Indy, and at times he does sound quite like Indy. On some level, I'm like, I think between the actors just being older and just how movies being made feels so different now. And that's not even now, this is 15 years ago, but even just at that point, it was so different from like the end of the 80s when the last one was made. I'm like, those movies just feel of a different era, and nothing you were going to do was ever going to feel like you're part of that same lineage. It feels so separate just because everything's so CG focused now. And on some level, I'm not saying no franchises can come back. Some probably should, specific ones that maybe could benefit from these different takes. But Indiana Jones is just one of those things where on some level, like, you know, I think you don't bring Die Hard back either, because I'm like, you know what? John Wick is now our Die Hard, and that's fine. Yeah. And something else will be that in another decade or two. Like, we'll have another thing that will replace those. But trying to do Die Hard 5 is a nightmare. It just did not work. It was horrible.
Oh yeah. No, you know? I think that if the franchise is just a general sort of universe thing, like the Star Wars and such like that, even Jurassic Park to an extent, where it's not focused on a specific character and their adventures, but just a larger idea, you can bring it back. You can work within that universe as much as you want. But Indiana Jones is the strange...
In theory, I would say that the Star Wars movies didn't actually do that, but go on.
No, they did not. But there are other shows in there, like Andor and Mandalorian, that explored different enough parts of it that they were their own thing. Not saying that the Rey Skywalker line was that. But for things like Indiana Jones, it's an issue of you have this character. You have to follow this character story, because otherwise it's no longer Indiana Jones and it's whoever it is we're following and So this has to be Harrison Ford. This, or at least as long as you're willing to keep it as Harrison Ford, because obviously there are things like Solo that exist. But but if you're going to keep it as the same character and just his continuing adventures, it's got to be the same guy. And if you're still building the stories around what he could do in his 20s while he's in his 40s, 50s, and upwards, you're going to have that same Die Hard problem where it's like, it's not working anymore. You have to work for whatever the age of the character is. And But I
want to emphasize that it's not just the characters and the actors and the ages. Like, I think, again, what I was saying before is that movies are just made differently from when these movies were made, and they were never going to feel that they're part of the same lineage, in the sense that they're never going to feel like they're one of them, right? There's all, like, because of the time gap, and unless they were going to go out of their way to try and make it, shoot it on film, do lots of stunts, do things how they were done back then, to actually try and recreate that magic the way it was done, but they didn't. It's all green screen and CG, so it just inherently feels that the DNA is wrong.
Right, and that's what I think is not an inherent thing in the franchises themselves, because they could go back, they could shoot it on film, they could shoot it on location. But what gets me the most is going from Lord of the Rings to Hobbit, and I know you're not a fan, but Lord of the Rings were shot with an immense amount of practical effects for something the scale of those movies.
This is a good comparison, honestly. Yeah.
Yes. And so you come back later on and you have Ian McKellen, who honestly has not aged that much. I mean, yes, it has been like 10, 15 years.
He was already an old man, so...
Right, exactly. But like he was in heavy makeup, he had a big beard, whatever. He looks the same. An audience can accept that as the same Gandalf. But then behind the scenes, he's no longer shooting with trick photography to make you understand the scale of these creatures is different. Well, he's shooting on green screen.
There's that famous...
It's something that doesn't work. Right.
There's the famous clip where he like breaks down and starts crying because he's acting with a green room with a green ball to show where the other actors are meant to be standing, and he's just depressed. He's like, "This is not why I went to theater school or whatever."
And there is no reason that if they really, really wanted to, they couldn't tell the Hobbit series, look, go out, do exactly what Peter Jackson did. And like Peter Jackson eventually hopped on board. They could have easily said, like, take as much time as you need. Do the whole pre-production thing. But in the end, whenever they make a new installation on these old franchises, it's solely because it's a easy cash grab. And to devote that extra effort to it is antithetical towards what they want to do. Yeah.
No, like... That's getting into a larger discussion of like the funding of movies and the greed and making them as cheap as possible, all that other stuff. Like I guess into all that, all right. Even though budgets are ballooning at the same time, so obviously the money's going somewhere. But I think fundamentally when movies are of a certain era and you have this franchise, like there are certain genres that maybe you can get away with it more than others. But like that, I love the Friday the 13th franchise, for an example, right? And they made 8 of those in the 80s, right? 1 through 8 were all made in the 80s, and then there's a couple in the 90s, and there's 1 or 2 later ones, and it's been dormant for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could enjoy a lot of new Friday the 13th movies if they started pumping them out, because effectively they're kind of just endlessly redoable, because it's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
But I think on some level, like, I would feel like the modern ones are like a new set. They'd be like a sort of subdivision, if you will, because fundamentally they're never going to feel like the ones from the 80s again.
Well, then let me throw this out, because obviously this is the real life example. Halloween.
Oh, yep.
So how does that feel? How does that feel for you?
Halloween 2018 was Halloween The Force Awakens, and it had all the problems that might entail. It might have worked better for me if I thought it was better directed, because I did have some problems with that. My biggest problems were that. But it had too much stuffed into it. It tried to, it became a trilogy, which led to its own problems. Halloween Kills is a lot more entertaining, but not for the right reasons. And then Halloween Ends is the only one that I actually think does some interesting stuff. It chickens out by the ending, but that actually tried to do something really unique and ballsy up until a certain point before it kind of chickened out towards the end. And because of that, I thought it was the best of the 3 quite easily. But it was the diversive one, because a lot of people hated that last one.
Okay, but I guess the main question in response of, do you see it as completely divorced from the original Halloween films?
Yes, absolutely. Like it's like Halloween's a weird one because they've reset and like ignore those sequels. We're starting from number 2 again. Effectively, they've done that a few times at this point, and they do it and they do it and. But it happens with any franchise that's come back. Now, it works in Star Wars' favor a little bit because they kind of frame it as this trilogy, that trilogy, this trilogy. And they try to milk it a bit more recently, but like that's what they've tried to do. But if you look at anything else that's came back and tried to like continue on, whether successful or not, like no one is going to say that Jurassic World's trilogy feels like it's next to the first. They feel like they're from two different eras, and that can be okay to a point if you make each one feel like they've got their own thing going or whatever. But this all boils down to just the core complaint is there's too many things being brought back. Like that's all this boils down to that, really. I'm not saying that you can't do any of them well. Like you can have successes, some can work, but they're doing too many, and the vast majority are these ultra safe movies. We're probably doing the Ghostbusters movies later this year, so look forward to our thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife when it hits.
I guess for me, the moment, like right now, I'll tolerate them. I don't like the fact that most of them are coming back, and I won't see most of them, but I'll tolerate them. The moment I will actively fight against is when Back to the Future gets its extra thing. That's the one.
That said, though, you probably will see most of them because we'll be doing most of them on the show.
Yeah, but I won't like it. All right, so anyway, we're going to get into ratings.
Absolutely, yes.
So for this one, I mean, again, it's not even on the same level as any of the three prior movies. I think that it's far beneath any of that. And it's not for the reasons of, we're introducing Mutt. I honestly don't think he's that bad of a thing. What it really comes down to is the fact of it felt so bloated with ideas of things that it felt like it wanted to do, and yet it barely did any of them.
Yeah, none of the ideas on their own were fleshed out.
Right, exactly. I would have been so in on the who can you trust commie plot. That would have been great. But instead it's given like a passing mention and then we just forget about it because mind control magnet aliens. And even that's barely defined as well as it should be. So overall, because of the sanitation of this, because how it feels just like corporate greed personified, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 4. And the only benefits I'll give it is I did really like that motorcycle chase scene because it was all practical. And I will say some of the jokes and some of the callbacks worked. Not anywhere near all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, there's the odd one that works, like, him calling Mutt Jr., that works, that makes sense. Marion kissing him first at the wedding, that works. Yep. There are moments that are fine and are even good, but it's worth saying though. I said this was easier to watch. I also watched it in 3 parts, which
you cheater.
It's like just over 2 hours long, and I watched it in 3 chunks. Which maybe says something. Like it's not that it's ever aggressively. Well, there's some aggressively dumb bits, but I wouldn't ever say it's aggressively hard to watch. But it's just kind of dull enough because it's never that engaging that I felt like I needed breaks, and I had to get a second wind to come back and watch the next part.
You know what it felt like to me, and I know this only because I jokingly put it on today as I was running some errands with my girlfriend. It feels like a Kids Bop album. Are you familiar with that? Kids Bop?
No.
It is a thing that's existed since the late 90s where they just cover pop songs, but it's just a bunch of 7 and 8 year olds singing it. And it's bad. They get decent enough singers, but it's bad because it's just a bunch of 7 and 8 year olds singing it. But the part that really gets people is when they cover songs that have explicit things in it, and they have to change it for the sake of the kids singing it. This is what that feels like, in that it's completely sanitized and it's just kind of aggressively stupid at parts because of what they have to change.
I think the final thing I want to say, and this is just kind of a larger point, to kind of building off what we were just saying before, is the stuff that comes back and does well, or somehow continues to feel like it's its own good thing, even when we get into later entries. Mission Impossible, which we'll be doing next year when the last one's coming out. I wouldn't say it reinvented itself, but it kind of found it's really what it was around the 4th movie, and that's where I really started to. I mean, I like the first one quite a bit, but I thought the 4th one's where it kind of okay, this is in the same way that Fast and the Furious almost with the 5th one is now we're this thing, and maybe there's an element of reinvention to a point. But the example that I like to bring up is Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks had 2 seasons, it had a prequel movie, and it was done. It was dormant. No one wanted to fund it, right?
Yep.
And that was it, right? And people longed for years. People cared about it, wanted a conclusion because it ended on cliffhangers. There was lots of things dangling.
Yeah.
And 25 years later, give or take, we get the announcement it's coming back, and David Lynch comes in and directs 18 episodes. It's effectively an 18-hour movie split into chapters that he comes in and directs. And what's so fascinating to me about that, and comparing it to all these franchises that come back, is that had story to finish telling, and David Lynch was not satisfied with just coming in and doing the natural conclusion to that. He came in with, like, I've got something new to say, and I'm going to spend 18 hours making a work of goddamn art that is filled with me saying something to the world. And some people don't like that it didn't just give them the neat happy ending. They're wrong. But it's this wonderful new thing because the creator had something to say. And when I watched Crystal Skull, when I watched, pick another nostalgia sequel of the last 5 years or whatever, I watch it and I go, the only thing these creators have to say is that we like the old movie and we wanted to do it again.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all they've got. And it feels hollow. And I'll take a sequel that people complain about, like Ghostbusters 2, over the nostalgia sequel that came much later any day of the week. Because while people complained that sequels back then would just be kind of doing something similar to the first movie again, at least it was a new villain. At least it was like, here's them going on another adventure. They at least applied a kids like TV show logic to it, where, okay, we want our heroes back, here's a new villain, they'll win by the end, sure, but we're going to have new situations, new ideas, and new settings throughout. And that was always criticized as not doing enough back in the day, but I'll take it for something like that over these nostalgia, everything, like every detail has to be worshipped and like treated like nostalgia food.
The thing that always gets me is the Star Wars, when they make a big deal out of Han's dice that he keeps in there.
Yes.
And I'm like, it was never a thing. You gave Han nothing. And yet when you came back, you were like, something needs to exist for the characters to stare longingly at.
And I'm not saying that this movie has specific detail examples like that, but the general sentiment and feeling I get from all these other examples is also here. It is that feeling of, we're doing this just to go again, not because we actually we didn't have an idea to actually do with the character or do something interesting with them. And the sad part is I don't think you even need to have that to begin with. The reason for doing the movie could be, hey, we want another Indiana Jones. Okay, fine. But a good writer will go away and, okay, what can we do with this character? What story can we tell with him and say with him that's relevant to today, that'll be a fun adventure, but actually has something to say about the character? And, like, I don't know, maybe you do something with, like, okay, he's old and reflective, so maybe you do, maybe it's a character that tells a story about, I don't know, how we view masculinity now, because that's changed so much since the 80s. Maybe you could do something with that, or whatever. It could be anything, but it has nothing to say. So, I mean, I agree with the 4 out of 10 to get to the number finally. But I feel like I wanted to go on that speech because that's the greater problem that this movie kind of is the tip of the spear almost, because it's kind of the early days of doing the nostalgia sequels. It's even worse now. It's even worse. And to take that into Dial of Destiny, like, all these early reviews that are middling to negative all sound like everything I don't want.
Yeah.
That's what they sound like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. So I guess the one point, though, that we do have to agree on, does it make the collection?
Oh, no. I mean, absolutely not. I won't say it cuts deep, but I will say cut your losses.
Cut your losses? I'll agree. I'm not going to disagree, but I do think it's on the upper end of that. I do think that it is just barely, like, it's trying to poke its head out into, like, no, guys, I'm at least worth a single watch. But then he swings from vines, and then I go ahead and kick him down a peg.
I feel like you're better off if you only watch the original trilogy. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll see what happens with Dial. We'll see where we get there.
And the same goes for Die Hard. I'd be like, you know what? Get to Die Hard with a vengeance and call it a day there. And we'll do them at some point and we'll go in depth.
Oh, yeah.
But,
absolutely. I do wonder how much different the world would be if Disney didn't get to extend out copyright to just be forever. Like, because the only reason they're doing this is because they and they alone are the only people who can.
Yeah. Well, it's not forever because they're not extending it again, and that Steamboat Willie is coming up.
Right. So that was 1920. We now have to wait 60 years before someone can do an Indiana Jones.
No, I know. But I was just saying it's not forever, but
Right.
you're right. They are going to milk these things. And it's worth mentioning as well that when stuff does go public domain, only that original version does. So the example I always bring up is Superman, where, yeah, Superman will be public domain in like 10 years or whatever it is, but Kryptonite won't be, Krypton itself won't be,
He can't fly.
Yeah, half of his powers won't be. Lex Luthor won't be. Lois Lane might be, but the Daily Planet won't be. But the Daily Star from the original action comic, like a lot of the elements don't go public domain until later. Another 20, 30 years, and then you're cooking. Then anyone can make like a traditional Superman story. But
absolutely. But that's I just wonder because they don't have to try. If they actually had to try to compete against other rivaling Indiana Jones stories, they might put out something with real effort behind it because these were these original creators that did it.
Joe is so funny is that you would think that because there's this time limit on the IP they have, you would think that they would try and devote at least half their resources to always creating new IP. To start the clock again, to get a new success that then has another 90 years or whatever it is to milk before it's not just theirs anymore. But they're so determined on being safe that there's, that's why they're mining comics and they're mining video games for IP, obviously. But,
Absolutely.
Anyway.
IP is incredibly hard to make something that's going to resonate with audiences for long enough that they're going to care for the entire length of the copyright term.
Yeah. So
is there anything else you want to comment on Dial of Destiny before we leave?
I mean,
or basically get that out.
I mean, we've kind of dipped it in here or there where it's been relevant, but yeah, the reviews are not encouraging. Like, I wasn't feeling that positive on the trailers. It looked fine, but I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, it looks like a nostalgia movie. And it almost feels like the general reviewers are getting harsher on these because they're getting sick of them.
Oh yeah. I guarantee you, if you took like the original Iron Man movie and released it in today's superhero fatigue, everyone would be like, "Oh my god, it's so boring."
I think a better example for this specifically, I think Star Wars Force Awakens and Jurassic World, which were 2015 and 2016, I think if you put them out now, I think they review much worse than they did it. The exact same movies would review much worse.
They would make sure to throw in the line, somehow the Death Star has returned.
Joe, it's funny because they're doing a movie with Rey, is that technically somehow a Palpatine has returned again.
I haven't caught anything Star Wars since like Mandalorian season 1, and I don't feel bad about that.
No. Unfortunately, I've got a sci-fi podcast, so I'm going to have to
womp womp
see a lot of the movies at least at some point. But
yep.
But there you go. There's our thoughts on Crystal Skull and also just the state of bringing back franchises in general.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was such a meaty chunk. I'm almost tempted to cut it out and make it its own little thing. But
no. Maybe.
It wouldn't really fit anywhere, so I'll just leave it in. But it definitely added like 25 minutes onto this, so we're hitting 2 hours almost on this. So
cool.
You can, of course, get some bonus content on Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Every month from just the collector's cut alone, we have a bonus episode at the $3 tier, which is a movie that usually, thematically ties into what we're doing on the current episodes. So we did The Phantom, which was a vote as well, actually. Obviously, we have a vote every month, and sometimes you're voting on a bonus episode, sometimes you're voting on a theme for a month, sometimes you're voting on, an episode for a month, whatever. But we did The Phantom. We also have the Extra Reels show, Collector's Cut Extra Reels at the $5 tier, where we do a So Bad It's Hopefully Good movie. We just did... What did we just do on that? We did Sinbad, The Battle of the Dark Knights was the last one that we did.
That was so bad, it's something.
It's pretty rough. And I can tell you the next one we're doing this coming episode is going to be a Neil Breen movie. The first time we've dabbled into Neil Breen territory, so look forward to that.
Sorry, I'm just going to mute my mic real quick. Hold on.
For the audio listeners, David is clearly he's dancing in joy, showing how happy he is. He's about to do a Neil Breen movie. I almost think he might be swearing of happiness right now.
So happy.
Yeah. So we got that. We have a monthly Criterion show, which is not a Patreon exclusive, but it's a monthly show that we do now as well. So make sure you check it out. We did Wages of Fear last time, which is a fantastic French film from the 50s, which I know you're like, oh, you're all snobby and hoity-toity. No, it's great. It's fantastic.
Also, that's the point of the show, is to be snobby and hoity-toity. So.
Yes. So, yeah, go check that out. And obviously, there's bonus shows for the Atomic Cinema Experiment, our sci-fi movie podcast, Screams After Midnight, our horror podcast. So there's a bunch of stuff on Patreon, and you can get extra content and support the show and help keep it coming. But you can do all that. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, get us on the social medias. At Screams Midnight is our Mail Fuzz Movies Twitter. But, go and have a look at all this stuff. But that is the show. That is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We'll see you next time for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Oh boy.
And following that, we get into Christopher Nolan season, which I'm looking forward to it. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And this podcast belongs in a museum.